The decision that determines your retirement isn't about your 401k balance. It isn't about your asset allocation or your stock picks. It's about a single ratio, a number that most financial professionals will never show you because there's no product to sell around it. And if that ratio is wrong at 45, the compounding math doesn't correct it. It amplifies it every year for 30 years in the wrong direction. Here's what I mean by that. The standard retirement conversation goes like this: maximize contributions, diversify your holdings, stay the course during volatility. Good advice, technically correct. Also completely misses the actual problem facing most Americans in their 40s. Because the reason most people arrive at retirement with less than they need isn't a strategy failure, it's a structural failure. They built a life that consumed every dollar they made before any of it could compound. And that structure was built one seemingly reasonable decision at a time, throughout their 40s, when every decision felt defensible in isolation and catastrophic in aggregate. I'm Tom. I run a business. I've spent over a decade surrounded by accountants and fiscal lawyers, watching how money actually moves through real lives, not hypothetical projections in a brochure. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own capital invested. This isn't theory. And what I keep observing is this: the gap between people who retire on their own terms and people who don't almost never comes down to income. It almost always comes down to margin. The space between what they made and what their life required them to spend every single month. That gap is everything. And your 40s are when you either build it deliberately or lose it gradually, usually without ever noticing it's happening. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan. I only ask for your email to send the report, so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. Now let me give you the framework I'm going to use throughout this entire video, because it's going to make everything else click into place. Think of your financial life as a ship. Your income is the engine. Your fixed costs, your mortgage, your car payments, your insurance, all the obligations you pay, regardless of what happens this month, those are the cargo you've loaded onto the deck. And the gap between what you earn and what you're already obligated to spend, that's your ballast. The weight in the hull that keeps the ship stable when the water gets rough. Without ballast, a ship is fast and looks impressive in the harbor. And then a storm hits, and it rolls. In your 20s and early 30s, you can sail with almost no ballast. The harbor is calm. You can make financial mistakes and recover because time is structurally on your side. Career, momentum, compounding interest, the ability to restart. You have a cushion that absorbs bad decisions. But in your 40s, you are in open water. The storms aren't hypothetical anymore. A layoff, a health event, a market downturn at the wrong moment, a family crisis that requires money you don't have. Everyone hits rough water eventually. What determines whether your ship survives, it isn't the size of your engine, it's whether you built enough ballast. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how the math of this plays out over 20 years, and the numbers are going to be uncomfortable. But first, I need to explain why most people lose their ballast without ever noticing it's happening, and why the mechanism behind it is more insidious than anyone talks about. The biggest financial mistake in your 40s almost never feels like a mistake, feels like success. Every lifestyle upgrade, the bigger house, the nicer car, the private school tuition, the vacation property, the boat looks from the outside like evidence that you've arrived. It looks like reward for years of hard work. And in the moment, it genuinely feels that way. The problem is that each of these upgrades increases the cargo on your deck. And cargo doesn't compress during hard times. It sits there, weighing you down, requiring income to service whether or not that income is showing up reliably. Here's the reversal I want you to hold on to, because this is the thing that makes everything else in this video click. You probably think the problem in your 40s is that you don't earn enough, that if you just made more, the margin would appear, the stress would fade, and you'd be fine. I understand why that frame feels true. It's also wrong. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances has been tracking household financial well-being for decades. What keeps appearing is that financial stress doesn't scale down with income the way anyone expects. Americans making $200,000 a year report living paycheck to paycheck at rates that would surprise you. A Bank of America analysis of their own customer data found the same pattern across multiple income brackets: high earners, chronically stretched, chronically anxious. The variable that actually predicts financial stress isn't income. It's the ratio of fixed cost to take-home pay. That's the number. And in your 40s, that ratio tends to creep up in ways that are almost invisible until something external forces you to look directly at it. There's a name for the mechanism: the hedonic treadmill. Every lifestyle upgrade delivers a genuine satisfaction boost for a period, then becomes the new normal, and then you need another upgrade to generate the same feeling. That's just how human brains process relative gains versus absolute ones. But here's the piece that doesn't get brought into personal finance conversations: the satisfaction fades. The fixed cost doesn't. The thrill of the new house is largely gone within a year. The mortgage is still there in 29. Let me tell you about a guy I'll call Daniel. He's 44 years old. He makes $130,000 a year. Solid career, good trajectory, genuinely respected in his field. In his 30s, he was actually in excellent shape financially. Modest apartment, one reliable car, low overhead, saving close to 18% of his take-home. Not aggressive, but consistent. Then came the marriage, the 2 kids, and entirely reasonably, the social gravity of his peer group. Everyone around him was buying houses. Everyone was upgrading cars. The kids' school had a culture around activities and camps and equipment that felt impossible to opt out of entirely. His wife's colleagues drove Audis. And slowly, decision by decision, year by year, each one individually defensible, Daniel's fixed costs crept up to match his income. Not because he was reckless, because he was normal. By 44, his monthly picture looks like this: mortgage, $3,800. 2 car payments combined, $1,400. Insurance across the whole family, $600. Utilities, subscriptions, and services he'd need to actively cancel, $400. Private school for 2 kids, $2,200. That total is $8,400 a month, going out to fixed obligations before he buys a single meal, fills a single gas tank, or puts $1 toward retirement. His monthly take-home is approximately $8,600. He has $400 of margin. $400. He's making $130,000 a year and has the financial flexibility of someone making $40,000 with minimal overhead. He's not struggling by any conventional measure. His credit score is excellent, his LinkedIn profile looks impressive, but his ballast is functionally gone. And he feels it somewhere below conscious awareness. He feels it. He does math in his head at 3 in the morning. He has a vague, persistent anxiety that doesn't have a clean name because it arrived gradually, one reasonable looking decision at a time. And there was never a single moment where he consciously chose to trade his financial security for the life he built. This is how the trap closes. Not through a catastrophic error, through a long sequence of defensible decisions that accumulate into a structural problem that's very difficult to reverse. Now here's where the ballast metaphor does its real work. Daniel is fine in calm water. When both incomes are stable and nothing major breaks, the ship makes it through every month. It's slow and heavy to operate, but it moves. The crisis comes when the water gets rough. His wife's company begins layoffs. Or Daniel gets a call about his father needing extended care. Or the market drops 30% and his 401k, which he hasn't been contributing to consistently because $400 of monthly margin doesn't leave much room, takes a hit at exactly the worst moment. With $400 of monthly buffer, any one of these events isn't stressful. It's potentially catastrophic. There is no ballast. The ship has no stability. It rolls. By the way, hit subscribe if you're finding this useful. YouTube's algorithm may genuinely never show you my videos again, otherwise that's not a figure of speech. That's how it works. Stick around, because in a few minutes I'm going to show you something about how thin margins affect your decision making at the cognitive level that most finance content never touches, and it's going to reframe everything. I want to introduce you to someone I'll call Marcus. He's 47. Mid-level manager at a manufacturing company, stable industry, solid employer. He makes $95,000 a year, which is good, but not remarkable for his age and experience level. His monthly fixed costs run around $4,000. His ballast ratio fixed costs divided by take-home sits at around 52%. Not perfect, but healthy. Because of that margin, he's been contributing consistently to his 401k and currently has approximately $210,000 invested. His colleagues know he drives an older car and lives in a neighborhood they consider unremarkable for someone his age. What they don't know is that Marcus has been offered 2 significant promotions in the last 3 years and declined both of them. And I'll explain exactly why that was one of the most strategically sound decisions he's made, but not yet. First, the math. Because without the math, the principle is just noise. Let's run 2 scenarios. Same person in both. 43 years old. Income, $120,000 a year. After federal and state taxes, take home is roughly $84,000, about $7,000 a month. Same income, same taxes, same age. The only variable is the ballast ratio. Scenario A, fixed costs at 60% of take home. That's $4,200 a month going to obligations. $2,800 left for everything else. Food, transportation costs beyond the car payment, clothing, entertainment, medical copays, and any savings. If this person is disciplined, they're saving somewhere between $500 and $700 a month. Over 20 years, at 7% annual return, that compounds to roughly $260,000 to $360,000. That's not nothing. That's also nowhere close to retirement. Scenario B, same person, same income. Fixed costs at 40% of take home. $2,800 a month in obligations. $4,200 in discretionary space. This person saves $2,000 a month, which is entirely realistic with this margin structure. Over 20 years, at 7%, that grows to approximately $1,040,000. Same income, same taxes, same age. The retirement outcome differs by a factor of 3. And the difference is not investment strategy. It's not picking better stocks or finding a superior fund manager. It's the ballast ratio decisions made about housing and transportation and lifestyle structure several years earlier. This is arithmetic, not finance, not strategy arithmetic, and the arithmetic is merciless. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and I mean that literally. This is the piece that changes the frame on everything else. Most people, when they internalize what high fixed costs are costing them, conclude that the solution is to earn more. Get the promotion, take the side income, grind harder. And look, more income helps. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. But there's a research finding from 2013 that genuinely reordered how I think about the 40s. And I want to walk you through it carefully. Economists Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir published research on what they called the scarcity effect. The finding: when people perceive that they don't have enough of money, of time, of any resource, their measurable cognitive bandwidth declines. The impairment they documented in controlled testing was comparable to losing a full night of sleep, roughly 13 IQ points. And before you think this is about poverty, it's not. Or rather, it's not only about poverty. The crucial finding is that this effect is triggered by the perception of scarcity, not the objective level of resources. Someone making $150,000 a year with fixed costs consuming 90% of their take-home experiences, the same cognitive narrowing as someone with objectively low income. The brain doesn't compare your balance to the national median. It measures the gap between what's coming in and what's already spoken for. When that gap is thin, the brain treats it as an active threat and reallocates cognitive resources toward immediate crisis management at the direct expense of long-term planning, abstract thinking, and strategic judgment. Think about what this does to the most consequential decisions of your career. Your late 40s is typically your period of maximum professional leverage. You have experience, reputation, relationships, and institutional knowledge that you simply didn't have in your 30s. You should be in your strongest negotiating position. You should be able to evaluate opportunities carefully, hold out for the right fit, take calibrated risks from a position of security. But if your fixed costs are consuming 80 or 90% of your income, your brain is in scarcity mode every single month. You take the first job offer instead of the better one that takes 3 more weeks to materialize. You avoid necessary confrontations with management because any disruption to income feels existential. You stay in roles that are slowly killing your career trajectory because the short-term cost of leaving is too high. You negotiate your most important salary conversations with hidden desperation written into every sentence, even if you don't know it's there. This is the cost of thin margins that never shows up on any retirement projection tool. It doesn't affect your portfolio directly. It affects the quality of every income-generating decision you make for 15 years. And those decisions compound too. They just compound in the wrong direction. Now let me show you what the other side of this looks like. There's a woman, I'll call Carol. She's 52 now. She makes $88,000 a year solid. Not spectacular by the standards of her peer group. Back when she was 41, she and her husband bought a house. The bank had approved them for a number that made her uncomfortable. So instead of buying at the ceiling of the approval, they bought a house they could afford on one income. Not both incomes combined, one. The house was smaller than her colleagues expected. The neighborhood was fine, but not impressive. Her mother-in-law expressed opinions about the decision for approximately 3 years. And because their fixed costs were structured around a single income, they had remarkable margin on 2 incomes. Carol maxed her 401k every year without strain. She built a cash reserve covering 8 months of expenses. She invested the remainder systematically into low-cost index funds and didn't touch any of it. In 2019, her husband's industry contracted sharply. He was out of work for 11 months. Their financial life barely changed. They didn't touch the retirement accounts. Nothing went on credit cards. Nobody panicked. The ship had ballast. The storm hit. The ship stayed upright. By the time Carol reaches 55, she'll have enough in invested assets that she could, if she chose to, stop working entirely and live comfortably on withdrawals and her husband's income. She probably won't. She likes what she does. But the operative word is could. And that word could is the entire game. That's the option. You're either building or foreclosing in your 40s. Most people will never get to that word. Not because they didn't earn enough, because they kept loading cargo onto the deck every time the engine got stronger until there was no ballast left. And every rough patch became a structural crisis. Now, let me put some shadow pricing on the decisions that typically destroy ballast in your 40s. Because the sticker price of a major purchase is a fiction. The real cost is the future value of the capital you're committing. Your financial advisor, incidentally, will enthusiastically tell you to maximize your 401k contributions. That's excellent advice. He will also, in the same meeting, try to introduce you to a whole life insurance product that costs somewhere between $200 and $400 a month and benefits his firm considerably more than it benefits you. Both of these things can be presented to you with equal sincerity in the same 45-minute conversation, and usually are. Amused disappointment is the correct emotional register. Back to shadow pricing. When you spend $45,000 on a boat in your mid-40s, you're not spending $45,000. You're spending the entire future compounding value of that capital over the time horizon that matters most to you. $45,000 at 7% for 20 years is approximately $174,000. That is the real cost of the boat. The sticker price is what you paid at the marina. The shadow price is what you paid in retirement capital. And that number never appears on any invoice. It's completely invisible in the transaction, which makes it the most dangerous cost of all, the cost you never see you're paying. I was at a dinner a few years ago. Guy sitting next to me, mid-40s, very successful, made sure you knew it. He announced proudly that he just bought a boat, $45,000. He said, and I remember this phrase exactly, "I earned it." Everyone at the table nodded. I did the math in my head. He didn't buy a $45,000 boat. He sold $174,000 of his future retirement to rent a boat for the next several years and then sell it for maybe $12,000. Nobody at that table thought of it that way. Nobody ever does. That's the whole problem. This shadow pricing logic applies to every major discretionary purchase. An $80,000 kitchen renovation in your mid-40s is $310,000 of future capital. A second vacation property at $150,000 down is $580,000 of future wealth. These numbers don't appear on the invoice, but they're real. And the compounding that would have happened on that capital is gone permanently, not deferred, gone. Now, here's the 401k problem specifically, because this is where the math gets punishing in a way that almost nobody explains clearly. Vanguard publishes a report every year called How America Saves. The most recent data shows that the median 401k balance for Americans in their 40s is around $150,000. Surveys consistently show that most Americans believe they need something like $1.2 million to retire comfortably. Some put the number higher. The gap between $150,000 and $1.2 million isn't going to be closed by better stock picks. It's going to be closed, or not, by savings rate and time. And in your 40s, time is shortening, while savings rate depends entirely on one thing: how much of your income isn't already spoken for. But here's a part that never comes up in the conventional 401k conversation. The last decade before retirement contributes more to your final balance than the first decade of saving, not less. This is counterintuitive until you understand the math. At 57, with $500,000 saved, leaving that untouched at 7% until 67 grows it to $986,000. It nearly doubles in the final decade. That last 10-year compounding window is the most powerful window of your entire financial life. If your fixed costs are too high in your late 40s and early 50s, there are two ways this window gets destroyed. First, you can't contribute enough during the exact period when contributions have the longest remaining compounding runway. Second, and this is the one that truly punishes you, may be forced into early withdrawals. If an emergency arises and the 401k is your only liquid asset, pulling from it before 59.5 triggers a 10% federal penalty plus ordinary income tax on the full amount withdrawn. If you're in the 24% federal bracket, you're paying 34 cents on every dollar you take out. So a $20,000 emergency withdrawal doesn't cost you $20,000. It costs you $20,000 plus the $6,800 in taxes and penalties, plus the entire future compounding value of what would have remained, which at 7% over 20 years would have been another $54,000. That's $80,000 of total retirement damage from one $20,000 emergency. And the reason the emergency required a 401k withdrawal is that your ballast was gone. High fixed costs don't just limit your contributions. They turn your retirement account into an emergency fund that the government charges punitive rates to access. That's the full chain of damage. Let me come back to Marcus now, because his story closes the loop on everything. Both promotions Marcus declined came with substantial titles and approximately $30,000 per year in additional salary. After taxes, that's roughly $20,000, about $1,600 a month. Obvious, yes, right? But Marcus sat down and actually mapped what the promotions required. Both roles involved significant travel, which meant additional wardrobe costs, more meals out, less time to manage expenses at home. Both came with implicit expectations around seniority-appropriate transportation and entertainment. One required a relocation to a higher cost of living market, which would have inflated the mortgage, inflated everything. Marcus estimated the true lifestyle costs of accepting either promotion, the real fixed cost inflation required to perform those roles credibly, at somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a month. He'd be netting perhaps $100 to $400 of actual margin improvement in exchange for dramatically increased work hours, higher job visibility, and therefore higher layoff exposure, and a life structure that would need the elevated income to function. He watched two colleagues accept those same roles. Within 18 months, both were laid off in a restructuring. Both were in financial crisis within 90 days. Their lives had expanded to consume the new income before the ink was dry on the offer letters. Marcus still has his job. His $210,000 in his 401k has grown to approximately $270,000, while they were scrambling to find contract work. His ballast is intact. His margin is intact. And he's quietly building toward an exit point that his formerly higher earning former colleagues can no longer even imagine accessing. Marcus isn't more talented. He's not luckier. He applied one question consistently. Does this increase my ballast or reduce it? Not how much does this pay? How does it affect the ratio? That one question asked persistently in your 40s produces compounding outcomes that diverge dramatically from the conventional career calculus. Here's what I've consistently noticed about people who reach their late 50s in genuinely strong positions. They tend to have lower fixed costs than you'd expect for their income level. They drive paid-off cars that don't impress anyone at their income tier. They live in houses they've owned for a while without the constant upgrade cycle. They have boring, automated investment habits that have nothing to do with picking stocks or timing markets. They put money in systematically, they don't touch it, and they let compounding do work that no amount of investment sophistication can replicate. Every personal finance publication this year has multiple articles on optimal ETF selection in a taxable account, and 0 articles explaining that your housing to income ratio is quietly determining whether any of that ETF advice matters at all. One of these things is significantly more relevant to your actual retirement outcome. Guess which one doesn't generate advertising revenue? Vanguard's data, Morningstar's research, and Dalbar's annual quantitative analysis of investor behavior have all tracked the same persistent finding for decades. The average equity fund has historically returned around 10% annually over long time horizons. The average equity fund investor has historically captured somewhere between 3 and 5% of that return. The gap between what the market offers and what investors actually receive is almost entirely behavioral. People panic and sell at the bottom. They chase last year's winner. They make emotion-driven decisions at the worst possible moments. And this is the part that ties back to everything we've covered, that behavior is almost entirely driven by the psychological state of the investor when volatility hits. When you have ballast, you can hold through a 30% drawdown because the mortgage is covered, the emergency fund is intact, and you have no structural need to liquidate. When you don't, you sell because you literally have to, because the fixed costs are due and there's nothing else available. The market didn't fail you in that scenario. Your ballast ratio failed you. So let me give you 3 things specific to your 40s, not generic. The first is your ballast ratio. Calculate it now if you can. Add up every fixed obligation, mortgage or rent, car payments, all insurance premiums, utilities, subscriptions requiring active cancellation, minimum debt payments, tuition, childcare. Add them up. Divide by your monthly take home. If that number is above 60%, you have a ballast problem. If it's above 70%, you're sailing without meaningful buffer and you are one bad quarter away from a real structural crisis. Every percentage point you can reduce that ratio frees up capital that compounds forward. Bringing that ratio from 70% to 60% on a $7,000 monthly take-home freeze, $700 a month. $700 a month invested at 7% for 20 years is approximately $350,000. One ratio adjustment, one number. The second is shadow pricing every major purchase. Before any decision that creates or extends a fixed cost, a new vehicle, a home upgrade, a vacation property, a significant renovation, run the capital through a 20-year compounding calculation at 7%. That's the shadow price. That's what you're actually spending. Once you start evaluating purchases this way, the decision calculus changes permanently. You're not comparing a boat to cash. You're comparing a boat to what that cash becomes if it's left alone for 20 years. Sometimes the boat still wins. That's a legitimate choice. But make it with the real number in front of you, not the sticker price. The third is the one income test. If you're in a dual income household, ask yourself a direct question. Could we survive on one income? Not comfortably survive. Keep the house, keep the kids in school, keep the core structure of the life functioning. If the answer is no, your fixed costs are too high. Life will present every dual income household with a period of single income at some point. Layoff, illness, career transition, a family member who needs care. It's not a question of if. The one income test tells you whether you're building a resilient structure or a structure that requires continuous maximum output from both engines and collapses the moment one slows. Your 40s are the decade where you set the ballast, where you decide whether the next 30 years are spent operating from options or from obligations, where every upgrade you accept, every fixed cost you add to the deck, either serves that goal or works directly against it. The decision at 45 doesn't feel like a retirement decision. It feels like a car choice, a house choice, a school district choice, a response to what your peer group is doing and what success is supposed to look like from the outside. But every single one of those is the same decision wearing a different costume. How much ballast am I keeping? How much future freedom am I trading for current consumption? The system you live inside was not designed to help you answer that question correctly. It was designed to sell you things. Every financial product, every car commercial, every mortgage lender approval letter, every visible status symbol is competing for the margin that would otherwise compound into your retirement. The system wins by making consumption look like success and margin look like deprivation. The people who figured this out are the ones driving unremarkable cars and sleeping well at 58. The people who didn't are the ones making excellent money and unable to afford a career change. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes, and the financial industry is aware of this, which is precisely why they will never stop trying to sell you something more exciting than ballast. The fork in the road doesn't announce itself. It looks like a series of ordinary decisions about cars and houses and whether to take the promotion. But the cumulative effect of those decisions, compounded over 20 years, produces two completely different retirements, one with options, one with obligations. Check your ballast ratio. Shadow price the next major purchase. Apply the one income test. These three things will do more for your retirement than any investment strategy, any tax optimization, any financial product anyone is actively trying to sell you. The game isn't about getting rich. It's about becoming uncatchable. The system designed to keep you productive doesn't want you to know the difference.